Ich helfe gerne auf diesen Chaos-Veranstaltungen.
I really like to help on these chaos event, and I really like to talk. And someone said once upon a time, CCC, they are the good guys. And this perception is created by the two speakers that we are going to hear today, because they work so hard on so many important things. Please give a warm round of applause for Constanze and Ingo on the topic of microtargeting and manipulation.
So, thanks a lot for this rather pathetic beginning. Good morning. We're happy to see that you're awake in such numbers. And we intend to talk about the Cambridge Analytica scandal, not at its core, but to take that as an inspiration to talk about political manipulation of public opinion. We want to look back at the year 2018 and talk about how this debate has been held for the first time, in my opinion, internationally as well. And we want to talk about a few ideas coming from Brussels and Strasbourg as the upcoming EU elections are bringing in some pressure. And we have some demands that we think would be useful to avoid disasters as we've experienced in the past 2 years, or at least so that we can recognize them as they're happening, if not prevent them. I mean, the scandal we're talking about has happened a few years ago, or is still ongoing since a few years, and we want to talk about how we can at least recognize this sort of backstabbing manipulation. And we'll start with a bit of a definition of terms, just to make sure we all have present what this is about. And I mean, the scandal has been a few months ago, and so let's just make sure, what are we talking about when we're talking about microtargeting? Well, we are talking about specifically talking to small and smallest groups. So groups that are political or commercial groups that are very, very targeted and talk to very directly. So for microtargeting, you always need two things. It's not just tailoring these messages and sending these messages, but it's always the analysis that goes before that defines these target groups and these targets. And that's always based on data profiles, demographic factors, local factors, or geographic factors, economic status, behavioral data, preferences, properties, and even psychometric analysis. And we'll talk about what that is in a bit. So this method is originally with commercial marketing, but is widespread and keeps spreading in the political area. And let's just say it's not about looking at specific actors, but more about a structural review of these methods and the toolkit that exists to do so. And we are not going to talk about effect mainly. Empirical studies on how microtargeting works are rare, and there are very different and controversial interpretations of this phenomenon. And we'll just leave it at, it's very context specific as to how it works, and it really depends on which actors use it for what and in what scope. And if we want to keep things simple, we have there is a bit of an analysis before these campaigns start, and in our and there's been a talk about police laws and their capabilities and so on. And as a party wants to support that or be against it, they do a analysis of voters, and maybe the analyst will say, well, as of this age of voter, this message will be particularly effective. And so they try to really tailor these messages to each other.
And I believe that it's important to stress that it's really targeted, very, very specific. And we will talk about this into more detail about what Friederike talked about yesterday from Privacy International. And it's also about people who actually do not have an account on these platforms. And that people actually are being analyzed across several devices that they own. And so let's say if you are just sitting on the tram and reading news on the way to work, then it will still be assigned and recognized as you. In the year 2018, the whole thing started, but the fake news problem was actually much, much older than that. And we would like to so we really want to talk about, not talk about fake news, but we want to talk about the targeting aspect in this very talk. And yeah, maybe some people of you might remember if you still had Russian in school, and of course, before the digital era, people were trying to influence the general population with propaganda. And of course, with the technical possibilities today, we have a completely different approach that is still in principle the same as in the older days. And it's really important to remember that there is a lot of experience and old mythology that is creating the foundation and also creating the understanding on part of the people who try to manipulate. And if you think about manipulations, not only during the Trump political campaigns, but also during the Obama era, people were always trying to influence other people and trying to influence the political public opinion. And they were really interested in making everything functional, efficient, and effective. And so there is no final result yet. Some of you might have read the papers that investigated these issues, but we still don't know that much, or we still don't have final conclusions. So there are some investigations going on, but there is no final conclusion yet for these investigations. And again, to the original setting, so if you think about the European Union election next year, so how is the current political situation? For once, we see that a great of nervousness in the political public, and especially in the digital public, there's a lot of mistrust against established parties, but also a general distrust against all news on the internet. And the second aspect is that there are basically two big companies that are mostly responsible for digital publicity, and that's just Facebook and
Okay, so these don't just produce content on their own side, but of course on the other side, and Google with YouTube and the DoubleClick ad network or analytics services, they are extremely important and almost dominant in terms of creating a digital public space. And we can see both of these services providers are coming, and they are an integral way of how digital public is structured and created. And that's the insight tooling, which so that provide people who have websites and run these campaigns know what they see, and there are toolkits for this sort of ad targeting where you can very easily put together, what does my target group look like? Where are they from? How old are they? What properties do they have? And it's easy to do that. And a lot of people kind of know that, but it's sort of not very present in public debate. Is that both with Facebook and Google, there is a custom audience function which allows advertisers to contact people that they've been in touch before, whether you're a political or a commercial advertiser. If you already have contact data, emails, phone numbers, then I can upload those to the services or check with these people and reach the people I want to reach. And moving on from there, there's the lookalike audience function where I don't just get access to the people who I already have contact data of, but also people who are the same or very similar as far as their data profiles go as the people that I already have in my database. And so all of these tools that are already provided by these platforms are an integral part of this micro-targeting, without which none of this digital public would work. So now that the GDPR has gone in force, that had some consequences. If I have a mailing list already, am I even still allowed to upload that to these services? And there was some discussion about that. And so in Great Britain, all of the political parties have been requested not to do that, and that will be done in the courts. And in Germany, we have this discussion as well. And the Bavarian Data Protection Agency has the same view and will try to enforce that as much as they can. In the Cambridge Analytica scandal, it was interesting, the data that was... the questions that came up in the investigations for the Cambridge Analytica scandal were mostly interesting because these companies finally had to answer some questions. And so what was interesting there was that you could see what was liked, what ads did people click on, what apps do people use. And if you have people who use these services, and then you can get data that cannot be used due to this discrimination prohibition.
And, well, this stupid Facebook, there are two types of scandals, and we probably forgot what the essence of this scandal is and why it was so big on an international level. And then also the parliaments who basically said, okay, we're going to get back to you on these issues. So even before the scandal, there were reports on scandals with Cambridge Analytica, but not in that magnitude. And this scandal is a special one because, first of all, it's about Facebook, and they are known for being not very strict about privacy, and secondly, because data have been used without user knowledge and without user consent for this targeting in political campaigns. And so let's quickly summarize for what was actually the issue with Cambridge Analytica. So there was, or how was it founded? There was a scientist that basically created then Cambridge Analytica, and there are actually some interesting stories how the name Cambridge Analytica came to be. Maybe it's because so okay. Note by the translator, I couldn't understand that, unfortunately. And so
what they used was an app that was originally meant to be used for scientific analysis, and they used that. They hired these click workers working for Sense. They took that app which connected to Facebook and filled out this questionnaire according to the Ocean model, which is an established psychological model, so that these people could be sort of their personalities could be determined by these 5 characteristics. So as they filled that out, they provided them with a very rich data set from Facebook, including all of their friends, and that came up to, I think, 80,000, if I heard that correctly, people. And so they took these personality analysis of the 23,000 who filled out the questionnaires and searched for similarities amongst the data profiles on Facebook, so that they ended up with psychological personality problems of 87 of thousands or even millions, if I heard that correctly, people had. And so in the US, they had a lot of more relaxed access to voter data, and so they used all of that data to try and support the Trump campaign in their political communication. So, as Christopher Riley, the whistleblower, describes, they use that to create these fitting ecosystems of information, including blogs and other websites, so that they could target people. And they created this impression of a neutral public, a neutral reporting by creating these websites and blogs that they could then show to people on topics from gun laws to immigration. And of course, that was mostly on political issues that were very polarizing and divisive. And of course, they used it for microtargeting in door-to-door campaigning, which is a very important thing in the US. And they created up to 33 conversation guidelines. And they knew, like, if I ring the doorbell on this store, which guidelines should I use? And they used it even on Hillary voters, because they knew that certain voter groups would not be reachable for that. But they used it to strategically demobilize the opponents. So in regions where Hillary is strong or would be historically particularly strong, women, people of color, they specifically sent them negative information to discredit that candidate. So women got a lot of advertising which talked about the affair of Bill Clinton to undermine the image of Hillary Clinton as this brave feminist that the Democratic Party was painting. And that's sort of a lot more widespread than in European or German political advertising. So there was a lot more possibility for manipulation there because this character advertising is much more important. There's no definitive analysis how much this affected the result. It's clear that this manipulation happened and that it would have some effect, but we can't say definitively if there wouldn't have been a President Donald Trump without this. We do know that if we know about the distribution of the voters, we can do our political advertising much more effectively. And again, we can use these demotivating messages. And of course, that played a much bigger role than it did in the Obama campaign, which did a lot of that too, but was much less criticized for it. And of course, it boiled down to 27,000 votes in 3 different states. So it was a really, really tight race at the end. So we also want to talk about the Brexit referendum, because that was also terribly, terribly close. And because in the British Parliament, the debates, the investigations are a lot more public and a lot more precise, and the statements that happened afterwards in British Parliament, they brought entire catalogues of questions for the corporations and Cambridge Analytica and what is exactly happening and being done. And we can always just talk about the advertising companies and data companies, but we also have to look at the political parties who regulate this and how much are they interested in that themselves. How big is the conflict of interest there? Since, I mean, we are clearly talking about questions of power, and after, like in the US, every 4 years somebody is elected, and Trump could be president for 8 years, but Brexit, that will be a problem for generations, and it will be a much more important question and much longer lasting, and it was even more close. So we can see with the Brexit referendum that the pro-Brexit side, Leave, exchanged a lot of data internally between the different groups there, which is not exactly appropriate, following the rules on data sharing. So just because I provide my data to one campaign, I did not consent to them sharing this data with other campaigns and other corporations that are formally independent and not supposed to work together. And we also saw that the leadership of one of these of an insurance company was very close to one of the pro-Leave campaign, and so the customer data of that insurance company was used to target people for pro-Brexit campaigns. And it's also important to note that Leave also used a lot of messages of questionable veracity and outright lies. And the investigations on that are still not done. Okay, as we're running out of time, we are keeping the next few topics short. but we want to mention them.
In Ireland, there was a referendum about abortion, about the law about abortion, which was very strict, and it was a very polarized debate in the public. And among other things, we could notice that in this political debate, there was not only people in Ireland influencing the debate, but also religious fundamentalists from the United States also tried to influence the outcome of these debates. And they actually set up websites in the United States to influence the general public's opinion about this debate. And so to highlight, this was just about very low sums, and people were actually spending a good amount of money on funding campaigns, even if it didn't affect their own country. And of course, this is something you don't notice until the whole campaign and the whole debate is over. Another example is the election in Kenya in 2017. There were two parties, and what we could see is that in Kenya and in many other African countries is that privacy laws are a lot weaker, and all the parties have a huge amount of data about people, including biometric data, telephone numbers, and we also saw a lot of negative campaigning against, with the campaigns of the former and re-elected president by using negative campaigning. And what we've seen is that a development that somewhat foreshadows what we will see in Europe as well, that there's a lot of things going on with messengers. So, for instance, WhatsApp groups or other messengers, that people were really targeting people on these messaging channels. And this was easy because the parties knew the telephone numbers of those people. That's why they could target them. And we already know that 2019 there will be a lot of elections, and it's very important and interesting to look at the new communication channels. But what we should also do is like follow the money, see who spends money where on what, and we will probably see many new technical strategies to influence people. And of course, if you consider Facebook, different continents have a different usage of Facebook. And yeah, for instance, in France, you had a great debate about okay, we're switching to Austria now. The election in 2017. And I hope you will see a pattern. In Austria, in the election in Austria, we had seen that an advisor and election manager of a social party, was very well versed with these methods. He used faked Facebook pages. So he created a website. It's on Facebook called "We for Sebastian Kurz," and they looked legit, and they looked like it's all real. But this was meant to. Okay, Constantis notifying me of the time that's running out. So it was really like misinforming people. It had a lot of followers, and it was also used to gain data, user data, to know who could be targeted based on the people who left data on that Facebook website.
Of course, as you can imagine, that led to some fierce debates here, and obviously it's still not clear if these attempted campaigns really affected the results. But we have to see that in Austria, this microtargeting and negative campaigning has been a lot more strong. Even if we look at other examples than this most crazy example of Tal Silberstein. In Germany, there was a lot of nervousness, there was a lot of fear, especially after the Bundestag hack, and that there would be leaks and from the Bundestag's hacks. So there was a lot of nervousness and insecurity ahead of the election, and the party is a part of a rather very vague self-declaration. Didn't really do anything to get rid of this fear and insecurity, at least not by providing transparency. Us at netzpolitik.org, we tried to create some transparency there, like how much money is being spent and so on, but we ran into a wall there. We straight up asked them, and they're not just the ones who regulate these things, so we just went and asked them, show us, who are you paying, how much, what for? You are creating these disinformation campaigns. What's the point? And the responses were pretty much zero. Green Party were the most open. Die Linken, the leftist party, talked about it fairly openly, but all the others, FDP, AfD, CDU, they did not answer. They did very little to create transparency and information. So, since we don't want to talk about the specific actors or examples, but rather about methods, let's summarize. What are the methods we have to watch out for? What do we have to expect in 2019? So, we tried just writing this again. So, seduction. Messages tailored to individual personality profiles. We don't want to. We don't want to say that like that this is the responsibility of the individual voter or anything. But we all need to be aware of these methods of attempted manipulation. Of course, it can't be everyone's individual responsibility. We need to have a political response and information. This list may help. We're not going to go through all of them one by one. Let's talk about the measures that have already been taken in the EU. So since December, very new, there is this Aktionsplan, this catalog of measures that shall be taken. That comes from the EU Commission. So that's the first time they actually did something at all, and that was all they did. EU regulation does not happen fast. They put down some proposals and requested all of the member countries to implement them, and that's more than just disinformation, but well, it's kind of a big thing. Okay, so they don't just want to try to stop disinformation, but they want to provide and pay for counter propaganda. And the British company, British government ran into trouble here, and they had problems because a group that they paid that was supposed to work against Russian propaganda suddenly was targeting the leader of the opposition, Jeremy Corbyn. And now we're building the same structures for counter-propaganda, and that didn't work in a couple of countries, and in Great Britain that actually had quite some problems, and it's gonna have consequences in other countries as well, because they targeted Spain because their the head of their secret service wasn't. They weren't happy with that person, so they targeted Spain, and so that's going to have some consequences, and that's not a good situation. But a lot of parties are not going to care because they want to use these methods themselves. So, but we have to say also that the EU doesn't really have the competences in this area. It can't do a lot. It's a bit late, but they are trying to work on some monitoring of these methods and this information. They had to recognize early 2018 that the election commissions in the various countries just didn't know. Some of them just didn't answer the questions that the EU asked them. So not just that they weren't ready, didn't have any measures in place or prepared, they just didn't react even. So the EU Parliament passed some demands, but they are not binding. So we'll pass over those and go on to our demands. So the first one, since we had this polarizing debate about the GDPR, we believe that our first demand, which is data protection, is manipulation protection, because as individual countries in Europe start to recognize that political manipulation is done with these with this data that is being gathered, then it becomes very pressing that data protection laws are in place here, if only so we can see if people are trying to do this manipulation. And at the same time, data protection is manipulation protection. And that that applies especially also to shadow profiles. So even if you aren't using it, data was gathered about you, and so that becomes ever more paramount. We do have some specific questions here. Well, we're going to try to go through this in the last 2 minutes. We got our signal now. Political campaigning. Yeah, political campaigning is always about convincing people. But what we can see is that these digital platforms, with their tools, make it possible to have this really, really strong asymmetry between those who do political communication and campaigning and those who are being manipulated. So it's absolutely necessary to create transparency there so that political advertising is labeled, and that you can always see, at least with the possibility to see who is targeting me, who is paying for this ad. And of course, that's not just a transparency register, but a collection of information on which providers actually provide this ability. Who are they, and who uses them with what money? The British actually gathered this information, and you can look at the data from 2018 to 2018. You can see where that money is going and where it's being moved around. And you can see, is cross-devicing being used, and which corporation gets the money. 3.2 million pounds were used for that, and which isn't very little money. And we just don't have that data in Germany, for example. We should change that, but that would mean that we have to change the party law in Germany. As in there, that's where the main rules are for transparency for political parties. And those are okay, but they aren't about where that money goes. And to create this sort of equality, of possibilities for candidates, we have that for TV, but we don't have that for these advertising companies. So we do not have this equality of opportunity for political candidates for these advertising companies. That's one. But of course, we as voters have to take these political parties to task. We have to know what they are using the money for, with which criteria are they targeting people, and it's not okay that we have to go after that information and keep asking and begging them for that information. They have to proactively tell us that. Psychometric profiling is already tricky, and really that's targeting. I wouldn't be sad if it were forbidden to target particularly vulnerable segments of society with these methods. So Facebook and Google create this a manipulation force that is so big that we cannot deal with this with smaller measures. The smaller measures are nice and all, but we really have to take big steps to deal with these tools that they just hand out, which have such a great potential, and we have to regulate that and deal with that. Sorry, it's our last sentence. Really, we'll write about this again and talk about even all the things we skipped. Okay, and Ceterum censeo, Google at Facebook, etc.